Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. So this is the first video of the free course on the na-bhairava-tantra. So I'm going to give an introduction to this course and explain what this text is a little bit. So this video might be just a little bit longer, but future videos will, in general, be about 20 minutes long, and we'll often just do one verse. In fact, most often we'll just do one verse per video so that we can go deep into the text and really understand every word of every verse, and especially for the practice verses, which constitute the bulk of the text. So first, this simple, short introduction. This will be a year-long course because the text has 160 verses, so I anticipate however many videos we end up doing, well, over 100 possibly. Anyway, so the na-bhairava-tantra is a text of Shiva Tantra, also known as Tantric Shaivism, and it appeared in the 9th century, probably the early to mid 9th century, so maybe about 850, the year 850 CE. And it's a text of the Trika lineage, specifically of the Kaula Trika, which means the more transgressive, more radically non-dualistic side of the Trika lineage. Trika comes in Kaula and non-Kaula varieties. And you're familiar with these terms if you've read Tantra Illuminated. And if not, that's totally fine too. So what does the title mean? Vigyan na-bhairava-tantra. The scripture, the Tantra, of the Bhairava, the awesome, intense, fierce, or frightening form of Shiva, who is in reality nothing but consciousness, especially consciousness fully conjoined with its innate power of insight. So Vijnana means both consciousness and insight. And people are more used to the word meaning insight or wisdom, but here in this text, it can also clearly mean consciousness. So the sort of literal translation of the title is the scripture of the Bhairava, who is in fact consciousness, your very own consciousness, that aspect of your being which is present in all times, places, and circumstances, all experiences from the subjective first-person point of view, of course. So this is the text that has been translated under many titles. Sally Kempton teaches a course on it called Doorways to the Infinite. There's a poet, a Californian poet named Lauren Roche, who's done a book on this text called the Radiance Sutras. So that's led many people to misunderstand that the title is in fact the Radiance Sutras. That's actually Lauren's own title. And the text does not feature sutras, but rather shlokas or verses. And that's also a book of poetry inspired by the text, not a translation. Many people think that it is a translation. We have actually many translations of this text, at last count about 20. So why do a course on a text that already has 20 translations of it? Well, mainly because none of those translations is actually satisfactory. And the main reason for this is, even though some of the translations are by competent Sanskritists, the published translations, what we're really interested in is actually getting super clear on the practices and their step-by-step instructions in how to do these practices. And here's where we run into a problem, because the text is intentionally elliptical. It's intentionally vague sometimes. So elliptical means not giving you all the information needed to fully understand or fully do the practice. So many scriptures are intentionally elliptical in this way in the tradition because they expected that the text would be explained by a competent, initiated scholar and practitioner of the tradition, or an acharya, or explained by a guru. So I'm more of the former, not the latter. And it does take about 12 odd years of full-time education in this tradition to actually understand what this text is saying and others like it. And the reason why is because you need to read broadly as well as deeply. so that when the text alludes to a practice that you know from other sources, then you can recognize that fact and then go and look at those related, complementary, or parallel sources to decode the meaning of the practice in question. So there's many examples of this in the text. Sometimes the practice is perfectly clear, and many times it's not. So you need to have knowledge of a variety of sources. And this is something that's not well understood, especially in America, where even scholars sometimes just focus on one text and like, I will unpack every meaning of every Sanskrit word, and they study the dictionaries and all the different meanings. But that's not enough. You really need to look at parallel sources and read a bunch of Sanskrit texts to be able to interpret each practice. And I've come to understand almost all the practices in the text, still working on a few, but I hope to have them sussed and sorted and well understood by the time we get there, as well as well practiced, of course. So many of these practices I've done over the years, and some I didn't because I didn't understand them yet. So that is the sort of background, preface. Now we want to just explain a little bit more about what's going on in this text. Well, first thing we notice is that it's a dialogue. It's a dialogue between Shiva and Shakti, but here going under the names Bhairava and Bhairavi. Okay, and the Bhairava is a name for the fierce or intense form of Shiva. The Vedic name for the fierce form of Shiva is Rudra. And the tantric name for the fierce form of Shiva is Bhairava. So when Bhairava is understood to be a deity, a specific deity among other deities, then he is pictured with fangs, and he's almost always completely naked. He wanders as a naked, disguised actually, as a naked beggar. And he holds a skull bowl. He drinks and eats out of a bowl made from a human cranium. And he's accompanied by a dog. Well, in the West, a dog is man's best friend, but in India, a dog historically is an impure sort of creature, an outcast creature that he befriends because he himself is a marginal, liminal figure who stands outside of the norms and proprieties of society and challenges them in various ways with transgressive ideas and transgressive practices. So I understand, by the way, some people are having trouble on the live video, and sorry about that. Perhaps the internet signal is not strong enough, but it looks as if the recording will be solid. So don't worry too much about it and get what you can now. So, but Bhairava in this text is understood to mean consciousness, as I said, specifically spacious, open, empty, pure consciousness. So the word refers to this, and we see it over and over used in this way in the text, referring to this kind of spacious, open, transparent, free, yet grounded consciousness, emptiness, no thingness. So this experience that aspect of consciousness, its aspect as pure openness or emptiness, pervades everything. And this no thingness is actually the very ground of being. Okay, so we see very clearly then that in this text, Bhairava is not understood as a deity among other deities, but as this aspect of foundational or fundamental consciousness. And then Bhairavi is his consort. So Bhairavi, almost the same word, but in the feminine. So what is Bhairavi signifying here? Well, the text tells us in a verse that we'll come to, but it's a key verse of the entire text explaining, what this is all about. And it says that Bhairavi is purna bharita, this state of complete fullness, this kind of overflowing fullness, that this intensification of being and presence. So it's when that open, spacious, pure consciousness of Bhairava intensifies or has a quality of kind of intense immediacy and a quality of fullness, full to overflowing, permeated by the bliss of one's innate nature, or the innate bliss of one's true nature. So we'll learn more about this as we go along. And So some people come to Shakti through Shiva, and other people come to Shiva through Shakti, meaning the text teaches that we can go into an experience of pure intensity. And it gives many examples of intense experiences, and then that intensity can be a gateway to reposing in pure consciousness, pure presence, pure being itself. And for others, they more easily enter into that kind of transcendent space of pure presence, and then they need to access the Shakti side of it too, seeking that intensification, the immediacy of being, brimming over with the bliss of one's inner nature. So the text as a default, though, assumes that we get to Shiva through Shakti, that it's easier to access the intensity of Shakti, whether in an intense sexual experience verses 68 and 69, or in an experience of merging the sense fields, being very super focused on the sensual environment, and then merging those sense fields into unity. That's verse 32, symbolized by the peacock's feather. And we have many other examples, including even unusual or unexpected ones, like the text recommends, go get a piercing, go get your nipple pierced or some part of you pierced. And the intensity of that experience, if you know how to access it right, leads you right into the spacious, open, pure presence and aliveness and being, that is Bhairava conjoined with Bhairavi. Many, many other examples, including almost what seem like silly ones, like, spin around and around and around until you're dizzy in the middle of a field, and then at a certain moment just spontaneously, fall down and look up at the sky. These daily life, almost quotidian sort of practices that the text offers us so that we can experience these states anywhere, anytime in everyday life. So the text has actually become famous for those practices because they are atypical for the tradition. We don't find them in very many sources whatsoever. Out of our hundreds and hundreds of sources, they're in only a handful. And one example was the text we just finished studying, the Swabodhodaya Manjari, which is a kind of sequel to this text, and much shorter and easier. So we did it first. But the text also has really, really profound yogic practices and really subtle yogic practices that are quite difficult to master, in fact. So it doesn't just have these daily life practices that anybody can do, though, finding the sort of entry point into Shiva consciousness is not necessarily easy for everyone. But having said that, there's also these yogic practices and esoteric practices that demand a discipline, a yogic discipline of daily practice in order to really get the hang of them. So there's a whole variety of practices, and I talk about those in the introduction to the text, that blog post titled, Will the Real Vijnana-bhairava Please Stand Up? And that's enough about that for now, because our time is limited. We want to go into now the text itself. But first, what we'll do is just have a quick look at Kshemarāja's invocation introduction verse to his commentary on the Vijnana-bhairava-tantra. So many of you are familiar with the recognition sutras written by Kshemarāja, aka the Pratyabhijñā Hrudayam, which is a sutra text. And the same author did a commentary on the VBT, the Vijnana-bhairava-tantra. And he wrote beautiful introductory verses that tell us why this awe-inspiring state of consciousness, this intensification of awareness and pure being state, is rightly called Bhairava. And in these verses, he plays with dualistic come non-dualistic language. So he's also using the word Bhairava to refer essentially to God. So this is a non-dual tradition that includes dualism within it as a valid level of perception. It doesn't exclude devotional language or theistic language at all. And that's part of what makes it different from some other forms of non-duality. So let's look at these verses to invoke the power of Bhairava for our study and practice together in this in-depth exploration of this almost 1,200-year-old scripture of original Shaiva Tantra. So Kshemarāja's verses are in your comment window. I haven't had a time to look at all your comments, by the way. So let's just look at the verses together. It's the new comment. Kshemarāja says, Shiva is also known as Bhairava because he brings about the initial spiritual awakening that makes us cry out in fear of remaining in the dream state, the world of suffering and delusion. And the words there are bhava-bhaya, fear of the dream state or fear of the world of suffering. Good fear, it's a healthy fear to have. But the reason he's using these words is because they are related to the word Bhairava. You can hear it, Bhairava, bhava-bhaya. So he's playing with words here very cleverly. So anyway, Bhairava is the one who brings about the initial spiritual awakening that makes us cry out in fear of remaining in this state of delusion, bhava-bhaya. And due to that cry of longing, he, the divine, becomes manifest in the radiant domain of the heart. Radiant meaning filled with subtle energy. The radiant domain of the heart meaning the core of your being. Divinity manifests in and as the radiant domain of your heart. Subsequent to realizing and waking up to the fact that there is suffering, there is delusion, there is confusion, and longing to be free of it. So then he says this, when Bhairava becomes manifest in the radiant domain of the heart, he or it or that experience bestows absence of fear, abhaya, for those who previously had been rightly terrified. He goes on to say, he is also known as Bhairava because he is the Lord of those who delight in his awesome roar, Bhairava. Again, deriving the word in that way, playing with words, nivṛtto style. His awesome roar, which signifies the death of death. Meaning the death of fear of death, the death of denial of death, the death of the failure to realize the power of death to liberate us in this very life when we befriend it, right? So his awesome roar signals the death of death itself. Lastly, Kshemarāja says in the third verse, being the master of that flock of excellent yogis and yoginis who tire of fear and seek release. He is Bhairava, the supreme, whose form is consciousness itself, brimming over with insight, Vigyana. As the giver of nourishment, he extends his power throughout the universe, which is permeated by consciousness. Yeah. Beautiful verses. And now we turn to the text itself, and we will do the first 1.5 verses, almost 2 verses, and you'll see why, because we have a end of a sentence in the middle of a verse. First, I'm giving you the Sanskrit, and we can sing it together. So first it says, the blessed goddess said, Shri Devi uvāca. So the Devi is Bhairavi. Okay, so let's sing it together. If you know the melody, otherwise just listen. Shri Devi uvāca, śrutaṃ deva mayā sarvaṃ, rudrayāmalasambhavam, trikabhedam aśeṣeṇa, sārāt adyāpi na-nivṛtto me, na saṃśayaḥ, Parameśvara. Kim rūpaṃ tattvato deva. And it ends there. Oh, I sang one syllable wrong, but I'll correct it when we come back to it. So let's do the first verse. Let's do the first word of the first verse. Okay, heard. Past passive participle of shru, to hear. Heard. Mayā, by me. I have heard in the passive voice. Heard by me. Why in the passive voice? So that the first word of the text can be heard. Very important. I've heard you. I've completely listened and I've really heard you, she's saying to Bhairava. And what did she hear? We're going to find out. First, I just want to comment on the importance of the word heard, because a text in Sanskrit always begins with the key first word. Like the Bhagavad Gita begins with the word dharma. And this text begins with the word śrutaṃ, which implies we need to listen carefully to what's being said. The goddess has already completely heard Bhairava, and she is modeling for us this devotional attention, this listening, this careful listening with the curiosity and desire to fully understand, to grok, if you will. So it also, the word śrutaṃ also is close to the word shruti, meaning divine revelation in the form of oral transmission or scripture delivered orally, right? So that word shruti refers to this, the Vedic corpus. And here we have śrutaṃ. This is not Vedic, but the importance of hearing and absorbing and listening clearly and really taking it in is stressed in the first word of the text. So take note. Śrutaṃ, heard. Deva, O Lord. Deva means king or lord or even husband, actually. And all of those apply here to Bhairava. Now, Abhinavagupta points out that deva comes from the root div, and div means to shine or to be playful. Has other meanings as well, but those are the two main ones, to shine and to be playful. So Abhinavagupta says we should understand the word deva not to mean God or Lord or King, but to mean the shining playful one. The shining playful ones are the gods, the celestials, the beings of radiant light. So deva, we could translate, oh, shining playful one, she calls him. And this is, by the way, not a fanciful translation, because Abhinavagupta himself argues for it 1,000 years ago. So maybe I'm not being too free. Śrutaṃ deva, mayā sarvaṃ. O Lord, I have heard everything, rudrayāmalasambhavam, that has arisen from the rudrayāmala. And here we have a double meaning, okay? Rudrayāmala is the name of an ancient scripture now lost, but it also means the Rudra union, meaning the union of Shiva and Shakti. So the Rudrayāmala is the union of Bhairava and Bhairavi, specifically using this old word for the fierce and intense form of Shiva. So, again, the first line is, I've heard, O shining playful one, everything that has arisen from the scripture called the Rudrayāmala, and everything that has arisen from the union of Bhairava and Bhairavi, from our union, because it's Bhairavi speaking. I've heard everything that all the energetic pulsations that have arisen from our union express in the form of scripture, especially this scripture, now lost. I've heard all that completely. And then she goes on, trikabhedam aśeṣeṇa. I have heard the entire teaching of the Trika lineage. The trikabhedam means the Trika division of the scriptural corpus. I've heard everything arising from our union, everything in the Trika lineage, right? You've taught me the Malini Vijayotata Tantra, you've taught me the Siddha Yogeshwari Mata, you've taught me the Trishiro Bhairava Tantra. These are the three key texts of the Trika lineage at that time. She's saying, yeah, I've heard and understood all that. And if, by the way, you think it's sexist that Shiva's teaching Shakti, we actually do get the other way around. In the Krama lineage, it's Shakti teaching Shiva. And he's like, earnest student to her, So we do get both for anyone who's concerned about that. So she says, I've heard the entire division of the Trika, aśeṣeṇa, completely, without any remainder. I've heard every word, every syllable of this teaching. Sārāt, sāravibhāgaśaḥ. I've heard it in sort of divisions of or revelations of ever greater essentiality. So vibhāgaśaḥ, meaning the literal meaning, it's a colloquial phrase. Sārāt, sāravibhāgaśaḥ, proportionately of the essence from the essence, meaning ever greater essentiality, more and more distilled forms of the teaching is what it means, very simply. And then she says, adyāpi na-nivṛtto me saṃśayaḥ Parameśvara. Even now, adyāpi, my doubts, me saṃśayaḥ, my doubts, na-nivṛtto, have not come to rest. They're not eliminated. I still have doubts, Parameśvara. She calls him, that's like Supreme Lord, but it doesn't translate well. We'll just keep it as Parameśvara. Even now, my doubts remain. They have not dissolved, O Parameśvara. So she's being super honest. She's like, I've heard all this and I'm not satisfied. I still need to get something else. You need to do a better job here, And then she says, Kim rūpaṃ tattvato deva. What is the true nature of reality, O Lord? Kim rūpaṃ. What form does the ultimate reality assume in truth, O Lord? Right? What is the nature of the ultimate reality, or of that ultimate reality is a bad translation, actually. That which is most true, that which is most ultimately true, that which is most fundamentally true. So let's be clear. Ultimate reality, bad translation, really means that which is most fundamentally true. That which is true in all times, places, and circumstances. That is the fundamental truth, right? So kim rūpaṃ tattvato deva. What is the nature of that which is in accordance with the suchness of reality, tattva, the thatness, the actuality of reality, if you will. Kim rūpaṃ tattvato deva. I want you to tell me what the fuck is really true, because I've heard all these teachings, and I want to get to the essence now, the absolute essence of the truth. So she's powerful, she's direct, she's brave, she's challenging him, right? Such a beautiful passage and exemplary, because Bhairavi, or Shakti, is modeling for us how to be a student. You listen to everything, and then if you're not satisfied, you challenge the teacher, okay? Follow in her footsteps, okay? And she's a bit of a feminist, we might say, because she's not meek. She's like, okay, now break it down. I want to get to the real meat of this, because you've given me a lot of words, and we're not there yet. Let's get to the real heart of the matter. Kim rūpaṃ tattvato deva. But being loving also. O Lord, O playful one, O shining one. Okay, so we're just getting into the text now, and then she's going to propose in the next verses, which we're not doing now. She's going to propose, hey, is the ultimate reality this or that or this or that? And we'll look at what those propositions are, what those possibilities are, those hypotheses. So that is our video for today, the introduction and the opening verses, and we will sing them one more time together, and then I will answer a few questions. We don't have time for all your questions because we got to wrap it up here. But it's always good, having understood the verse, to then go back and sing it again, if I can find it amidst the comments. Here it is. Shri Dev uvāca, śrutaṃ deva mayā sarvaṃ rudrayāmalasambhavam trikabhedam aśeṣeṇa sārāt sāravibhāgaśaḥ adyāpi na nivṛtto me saṃśayaḥ Parameśvara kim rūpaṃ tattvato deva. Ending with a question. Perfect. So just take a couple of questions. Thank you all for joining. And before we conclude, let's remember to thank the patrons on Patreon that make all this free content possible through their generous support. Because of their support, I have financial security, basically, so we can present all these free teachings for a wider audience. And I should mention, by the way, lastly, that, of course, tantric scriptures are usually understood to be secret or esoteric, not to be presented to be a wider audience. And that's true. But the Vigyan na-bhairava-tantra is different because it's already out there in multiple translations, mistranslations, and misunderstandings. It's the cat's out of the bag with this text, so it's worth it to present the teachings in this very clear format, in which, with every single verse, I'm going to break down every single word so that you guys see that I really understand the Sanskrit. And if there's any Sanskritists listening, please check me on anything, because I'm really going through this text word by word. Okay. So Ricky asks, can we have the Sanskrit verses in advance to print out for next time? You do have them in a post in the Facebook group. We go up to verse 38 in that post, and there'll be more, so you have them in advance. Not the first verse, the first 38 verses. How to make a donation. You can go to my webpage, harish.org. There's a donation button there. You can make donations. Thank you very much. Or you can sign up for Patreon and have a monthly donation, for which you get a whole bunch more content. Someone asks, what's the meter? Anushtub meter. Standard meter for shlokas, for short and simple verses. Yogi Ram Brent says, the ending feels incomplete. Yes, I stopped before the last bit of the last verse on purpose, and you'll see why. Kelly posted the link to Patreon for those who want to become a patron, or just to be aware of that. Someone asks, is Bhairava the same as Parabrahman in Vedanta? No. Explain more about that later. It's a much more sort of intensified, an embodied vision of consciousness rather than an abstracted and transcendentalist vision of consciousness. Okay, thank you all for your sweet comments. Nice to be with you for this first video, which again ran long, but they will in future be shorter, more like 20 minutes, sometimes 15 minutes even. So nice to be with you. So happy to be embarking on this study. And please do make a practice, if you want, of chanting the text regularly, maybe just going as far as we've gotten. And in that way, you'll memorize the foundational verses and get the Sanskrit in your energy body. And we'll explore more. The practices don't begin until verse 24, but it's worth it to go through the foundational view teachings, darshana teachings that introduce the text. Om.